Robin Zander, scene A1.
Hello and welcome back to SNAFU. I'm Robin Zander and I am so excited to share today's guest. Alex Pang is the author of several books, including Work Less, Do More, Designing the 4-Day Week, and Rest, Why You Get More Done When You Work Less. Alex is going to be coming on stage at Responsive Conference 2024 to talk about both of these books and quite a bit more. As a brief aside, Rest was quoted as such a valuable book. If work is our national religion, Pang is the philosopher reintegrating our bifurcated selves. And that's by somebody you may have heard of, Ariana Huffington, in the New York Times Book Review. So when I say that Alex Pang has been recognized, you get a little sense of what I mean. This is a podcast brief with Alex about both of these books and his work more broadly. He pulls from stories of historical figures to talk about their work lives and looks at companies in Work Less, Do More, companies from around the world that are doing different experiments and adopting different philosophies and different approaches to work. As somebody who's been a lifelong entrepreneur, I have some qualms about work less, do more as a lifestyle. I don't know that that's always possible. And we dive into some of my doubts and concerns about that in the podcast. And then talk also about how rest, and not just sleeping or zoning out in front of the television, but rest that is deliberate and that is a change of pace, can reinvigorate ourselves and allow us to do more in our personal and professional lives. At Responsive Conference 2024, Alex is going to be joined on stage by Abby Davison, who is notable in her own right and an author as well, but whose professional and personal life was very much shaped by Alex's philosophy of rest. So if you're interested, you can learn more about that at responsiveconference.com. But in the meantime, enjoy this wide-ranging conversation about work, rest, and being our most productive selves with Alex Pang. All right, Alex, thank you for coming on today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Robin. It's great to be with you.
And particular, thank you for agreeing to come on stage at Responsive Conference 2024. I'm really looking forward to seeing you and Abby, which we'll talk about on stage in, as we're recording this, we're just over 30 days out from the conference.
Yeah. So, no, I think it'll be a good time, and I'm quite looking forward to it, and to the conversation with Abby as well. So,
there are so many conversations that I want to have as previous author and aspiring author and writer myself. You've written a bunch of books that I want to talk about, and I'm curious about your writing habits. But let's just start with, for folks listening and watching who don't know you and don't know a little bit about your history, let's just start with a brief intro.
Sure. So my name is Alex Pang, and I am author of several books, including Rest, which is a book about the hidden role of rest in the lives of really creative and prolific people, and the kinds of common patterns that you see in Nobel Prize winners and famous authors and composers and other kinds of creatives. That also explains why it is that certain kinds of rest turn out to be sort of really generative of sort of insights and also sort of help sustain creative lives. And then my most recent book is one on the global movement to shorten the work week. So it's about 4-day weeks, or companies that adopt other kinds of shorter, 6-hour days or such, without cutting salaries or cutting, expectations around quality of service delivery or client expectations and so on. And again, with that, it's about the kinds of unexpected but common patterns that you see in companies, as different as, design firms on one hand to, custom RV manufacturers on the other. And what challenges they have that make them decide to do a 4-day week, how they solve those challenges, and what they get out of it. And in a way, it's kind of how they put the lessons of rest into practice at scale for everybody in their organizations. So that's that's the kind of stuff that I work on.
Amazing. This is not a spicy takes or a combative interview, but and there's a but there, which is kind of funny because anyone who knows me knows that that's like very, very true. Um, so we do Xander Media, my day job, my small film company does some filming at HR Transform. Transform, the big annual HR conference that happens in Las Vegas, and Transform is partnering with us on Responsive. They're doing a panel at Responsive. And one of the questions that we asked a bunch of people at Transform a few years ago, so this was a mix of founders and CEOs in HR tech and CHROs of name brand companies, was 4-day work week or 5-day work week. And to a T, I probably asked 50 people this question, right? And these are name brand CHROs or founders of, the biggest news site about HR technology in the world, or right, authors, et cetera, et cetera. To a T, all of the entrepreneurs and founders said 5-day work week or said 7-day work week, and all of the CHROs said 4-day work week.
Mm-hmm.
My personal anecdote there is before or actually in the early days of Responsive and before Xander Media, my business was Robin's Cafe, which is a restaurant and events venue in the Mission that I started in 2016. Longer story, but sold on Craigslist in 2019. So when I say I'm a professional dilettante, I really do mean it. But running a restaurant in the city and county of San Francisco against the margins that is the restaurant industry is really hard. And it requires, I've never known a restaurateur or a pro chef to work 4 days a week, because then you go in on your day off, which is day 7, and are prepping ingredients. So I'm curious how you square that, because I in reading your work, in meeting you, just briefly on the internet and now together in person, you're a realist. You're not saying that this is the fundamental best way and the only way to do it, right? And so how do we square that with entrepreneurs, with people who are starting things and the amount of effort that it takes to start things or run a restaurant? How do we do a 4-day work week in those stages of running a small business?
Sure. So first off, I think the first thing to say is that any real reduction is a net positive for for founders and for everybody who works for them. So there were a number of restaurants that have moved to 4-day work weeks, and I talked to them, and lots of them you're still doing. They're still coming in, doing prep in the late morning and closing late in the evening. But the difference between doing that for, 48 or 55 hours a week versus 75 hours is still gigantic.
Sure.
And, having the 3 days off is really, really big. So I think that the first point is that, while, just as the 5-day week or the 40-hour week is a kind of economy-wide default from which lots of us today deviate,
Right.
So too is the 4-day week something that is more of, for lots of places, it's going to be kind of an ideal or a placeholder as opposed to the thing, this hard and fast goal that you have to cross or you're a total failure. The second thing is that, it's absolutely the case that there are kind of professional differences or, occupational different,
margins.
attitudes. And,
Yeah.
And I was doing a thing with a hospital last year and found that, as we were talking about it, it took the nurses about 2 minutes to get on board, right? The doctors, in contrast, were very skeptical because they all thought they're Superman and they're the one who
we
can.
have the surgeons on one side and then the actual people who are putting in catheters on the other.
Precisely.
Right? With the stereotype of ego versus service.
Right. And then the legal team wouldn't even meet with us, right? That it's perfectly fine if you're a pediatric, a pediatric nurse in the intensive care unit But up here, where we're doing real man's work and, suing vendors or reviewing contracts, there's no way that we could possibly do this. And it's not like these are three groups that are, one of which is less professional or less dedicated than the other. It's just that they all have different ideas about time, about cooperation, and how professional standards translate into being on the hospital floor or at the bedside. Yeah. And so I think that but I think it's absolutely the case that there are these kinds of differences that we need to kind of talk through. But it's also the case that we have seen this take hold and work in all kinds of places where overwork is the norm, where people grew up thinking that that success was like an arms race against burnout. So,
right. To set the stage, right, this is happening in a conversation where, right, we had a phase of quiet quitting, where we have record levels of burnout and stress in the workplace, where we have people more dissatisfied with work than ever before, right? This is not happening in a vacuum.
Right.
Yeah. I'm probably going to ask at the end of this conversation for, right, maybe we could do a full hour together at some point after Responsive Conference, but just because I find myself completely riveted by this conversation because I've lived both sides of it, right? I've been a professional circus acrobat who was working nights and weekends in a tech job because I had a day job, quote unquote, doing acrobatics with the San Francisco Opera. I've also been a founder where I'm scrabbling and working 80 hours a week and trying to get my employees to work more because otherwise the business will cease to exist. And those are right, kind of polar opposite lifestyles and polar opposite needs in terms of the amount of work. So I really like how you're contextualizing it as it's a variable. And this 4-day work week or whatever, 7-day work week should be a conversation among many variables. Pardon me, I'm going to take my dog's bone away. She's going to be disappointed, but she won't have chewing in the background. Oh. This collie Pit hears me in conversation is like, Dad's talking, so I'm going to go chew in the background. Rest.
There are no bad dogs.
We can agree on that. By the way, and this is the first time this has been shared publicly, there will be puppies at Responsive Conference.
Oh,
we
fantastic.
do, in fact, have emotional support puppies in a giant litter who are going to be joining us on both days of the conference.
Well, I hope they're allowed on stage.
I don't know about on stage. I think they're only going to be in their pen, but we then can get in their pen and cuddle them.
Okay. Sounds like I need a rider on my agreement then.
Right. I don't require specific food, but I do require puppies when I come to speak at the conference. Yeah. Rest is another, and this is why I say more time, because rest is such a fascinating topic, both personally for me as somebody who's spent 20 years now training movement every day. And a lot of people who maybe know me peripherally know me for doing handstands or learning gymnastics as an adult and having a career as a gymnast. But what's maybe less known is the amount of time that I spend doing very intense work that is very internal, right? Somatic meditative practices, sauna and cold plunge, as opposed to handstands and backflips. And so I guess I have so many questions about rest for you, but one of the things that you've written so eloquently about rest is it's not you're asleep or you're, zoning out in front of the television. What have you applied in your life about rest that you did not have quite as clear before you wrote the book?
That's a good question. And the simple, short answer is I do everything that I talk about in the book now, and it has made a gigantic difference both in the quality of my life and the work that I'm able to do. I mean, I think that one of the really striking insights that I had writing the book was that actually the best kinds of rest are not passive, right? Sort of sitting on the sofa with a bag of salty snacks in one hand and a TV remote in the other, though that has kind of its place in moderation, but rather that, the most restorative kinds of rest often are active, physically active or cognitively active. And that it's a matter of sort of finding the things that maybe exercise those parts of your body or brain that sort of your day job does not. But, and finding a rhythm in which you can fit this so that it is sort of energizing rather than exhausting. But that, that sort of taking that mission seriously and doing it on a regular basis turns out to be really valuable, sort of no matter what kind of work you do. I think we often sort of underestimate how sort of physically taxing cognitive or creative work is. But, in fact, our brains are really greedy for oxygen and glucose. And basically, the better we are at feeding our brains, the better we'll be at at supporting them doing critical work. For me, I think that the top line things have been recognizing that there are structuring my day so that I've got periods of really serious focused work, layered with periods of sort of deliberate rest. And so when I'm writing a book, I get up at 5 a.m. I'm writing for about 2 hours or so. Then I take out sort of the dog. We go for a long walk. And I'm often thinking about what I've just written or the next thing that I've got to prepare, and come back often with a couple ideas that I had on that walk, do a couple more hours, and then pretty much I'm done with the heavy lifting for the day by about 10 a.m. And, I don't then sort of give up completely, but
Veg out in front of the television the rest of the day.
But it is amazing how much you can get done in a period of several really focused hours with that kind of work. And I think that what readers have taken away from rest is that, this is not a pattern that works for every kind of job, obviously, but that, the challenge of figuring out, first of all, what kinds of rest are really valuable for you, what kinds are most restorative, and then second, figuring out how to work them into either your daily routine or into sort of your life more broadly, turns out to be sort of a really valuable way of creating both more balance in your life, but also helping you to do, to do work that you find sort of meaningful at a level that you find rewarding. So
You've
I
made a
hope that answers
study
the question.
and sparks many more questions.
Yeah.
I've made a study of writing. I self-published 2 books.
Hmm.
In 2012, a book about how to do a handstand, and in 2017, responsive, right? Some case studies of people building very different responsive or resilient organizations. But I really feel like, which even now, like I look at whatever it's been 7 years later and has aged pretty well.
Mhm.
But I really feel like I've made a study of writing only in the last year. And I've been always fascinated by the historical career of, we'll call them name brand authors, right? The Ernest Hemingways of the world. And the amount of deliberate rest, the amount of okay, yes, I write for 3 solid hours between 5 and 8 in the morning, and then then I have some leisure time, and then I have lunch, and then I take a rest, and then I have some social, and then I go to bed, and then I do it tomorrow. What do you write when you're writing a book, when you're working on a project? Do you write, how many days a week do you write?
I will generally do 5, maybe 6 days, and I will do 3 hours is pretty good. 4 hours is great if you can sort of get that.
Yeah.
And that's really, if you do it steadily, all you need over the course of, several months to finish a book. It's really, you think of it, if you can do an average of 1,000 words a day, most books are like 70,000 words. So sort of that's what, sort of 3 months if you're really good.
Right.
Odds are it's probably going to be more like 6 or so, minus the, minus the research time and other things, sort of involved. But thinking of it that way, breaking it down into, a task that you do every day for a few hours without fail takes this, often big, daunting looking thing and makes it feel a lot more doable and sort of approachable. So, but, I think that the regular practice at a time that really works for you, meaning you can have a substantial period of uninterrupted time where you're really able to get into flow, is if you can get those two things, then you're like 80% of the way to being able to finish a book, as far as I'm concerned.
I feel like there's I know a little bit more about how to change behavior and how to form habits than I do about writing books. And I feel like everything that you just said could be applied to behavior change in the same way.
Yeah.
Is, what am I trading out? What am I not doing? Making a concerted effort, right? There's for me a celebration of the progress is the like, no
Mm-hmm.
matter how small, right? It doesn't matter if those words that you've written today are good or bad. If you've written your 1,000 words for the day, right? That's a win. If you've sat
Right.
down for 3 hours, that's a win,
Yeah.
right? And the same can be true in behavior change.
Mhm. No,
Um,
there's a great line. There is no great writing, only great editing.
yeah,
And I think that the hardest thing is getting started and generating that first draft.
yep.
So definitely celebrate that.
Well, you're coming on stage at Responsive Conference in just over a month. Share a little bit. There's a backstory. You're going to be joined by Abby on stage, whose work or whose career has been changed by your work. Share as much or as little of that as you would like to as a teaser for folks listening.
I think that sort of Abby and I, Abby wrote this lovely book about decision making and and the way in which we make big decisions in money and love and sort of other things. And so what we're going to be doing real is sort of talking through ideas from each of our projects and sort of how they apply in sort of the world of sort of the audience's world. So I think that's and beyond that, I hope that I hope that's enough to get people interested, because I don't want to give away too much.
Great. This is Abby Davison. Had an incredible career at Gap and wrote the book Money and Love. Uh, we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Money and Love, an intelligent roadmap to life's biggest decisions. So that meets rest, and that meets the 4-day work week. Alex, I'm really excited. I was looking forward to both this conversation and your session at Responsive before we sat down, but now 30 minutes later, I'm like, oh my God, can that come tomorrow? Thank you for taking the time on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you, Robin. It's been a pleasure.